All good, all good. Just going for a nice peaceful walk this hour. Nice and fresh. Feels like a nice spring afternoon. And I was going to be reflecting on conversations I've had with coaches in football and players around luck and becoming a professional footballer, the role of luck. And I suppose luck in the context of the conversation today isn't sort of good fortune, so to speak, because obviously to become a professional footballer, people work really hard, players work really hard to get there, and there's no shortcuts. So it's not good fortune as such. It's like the variables you can't control. There's a lot of variables in the game you can't control. And I suppose the simple math, when you think about it, there's only so many places available. And so many people want to become a professional footballer. And you've got only so many places, so limited spots. So if you think about the UK alone, let's say Premier League, the EFL, Championship, League One, League Two, you've got 92 teams. Let's say those teams, you've got 25, 30 registered professionals. And I suppose you could argue, okay, you've got maybe the 21s, and we could even extend that to the National League if you wanted to. And say a lot of the National League teams have professional players who are pro. Not all of them, but a lot of them are within that sort of context are as well. So even if we ran with 116 clubs, so to speak, and we came from the approximate 4,000 places, so to speak. If you just focused on the Premier League, obviously it narrows it down a lot. But let's sort of go for the whole thing. And if you think about, I think I saw some research somewhere that there's 1.5 million registered players play youth football. So we're focusing on the sort of men's game now. I didn't see a gender breakdown on those sort of registrations for youth football, but let's run with 1.5, because outside that you're going to have many players that aren't registered and would like to be professional if the option comes. And then you could argue that there's players that are registered as youth players that maybe don't want to be a professional player, but we'll run with that, because either side of that you're going to have players that do want to and don't want to. So we run with that as a loose figure, give or take. And this is in England and the UK. 4,000 divided by 1.5 million gives you about 0.02% chance of making it. So you could make a case in point that there are plenty of players who don't make it not because of ability, but for various reasons too. But equally, there's a lot of players out there that maybe there's not good enough as well. But I suppose from the perspective of luck, from this perspective, it could be, say, for example, injury. Timing of injury. Maybe sort of a player gets injured as an injury. It could be genetic. When I say genetic, that's not undermining the hard work that certain professional players put in, but some people could train a lot harder than other people but never have the same speed. For example, the genetic, the fast twitch fibers, the endurance, the stamina, and that's a given. That's not suggesting that every player that plays professionally has got this sort of genetic advantage in one sense, but from a physiological perspective, obviously things like VO2 max, speed, agility, and that sort of stuff, that has an impact. We know from athletes, some athletes are more suited to do certain events more than others, so that you're not really in control. You're not in control of that. Injuries, not in control of that as well for the most part. Family support. Certain players have got a lot of family support to drive them to matches, take them to training. Not everyone's got that as well. The timing, it might be that, so you're a youth scholar, and for example, the club's looking for a striker, or it could be they need a right back or a left back, so to speak. And just timing. It's maybe another club sees you and think, what we could do for a player like that, for example. So, you could have players of similar ability who are in a youth team, but a specific player is required. Maybe there's an injury to a left back, maybe there's an injury to a striker, and you get a run through chance and coincidence. So there's, I think, disproportionate representation of players born, I think, from January to March, and the research suggests, and that's probably because that probably coincides with development. They've got that sort of extra time for development, so you could argue there's a bit of an advantage with sort of the season starting generally at youth level in September or so. So that could be an advantage as well. Now, physical development in terms of stages of development, some players develop later, with the decision for the most part on getting signed to be a pro, being around 18. Don't get me wrong, some players, they leave the pro game and come back and they might sort of get a chance in under 21, but obviously some people develop physically later as well, and that could be a disadvantage too. So there are various things, and these are only some variables I've talked about. I'm sure there's plenty of others, and we can talk about the variables on another day. But here I'm talking about, here specifically, luck in the context of things that we don't have a lot of control over. So you can work as hard as you want, you can train as hard as you want, and I'm not suggesting otherwise, but you can do all that and still, for various reasons, not make as a professional based on these factors alone. But I think that, the important thing is there's only so many positions available, okay, and so many people want to become a professional footballer. So here I've kind of focused on the men's game, so to speak, and from that perspective, so to speak. So, but yeah, so it's that's that for me. There's so many variables, but when you think that, let's say, give or take, there's 4,000 places available, give or take, if you do the math. The 92 professional clubs with squads of 25, 30, plus you might say, okay, you got the National League that as well, is it 24 teams or so in the National League? Let's say even if 20 of those had professional players as well, and maybe you take some of the 21s as well in the Premier League and EFL, and then you times it by not necessarily just the amount of registered youth players, but also like players who aren't, you could times that even by players who aren't registered as youth players, who aren't playing at a specific time, that obviously, if given the opportunity, might want to be pro. So we're kind of using those sort of figures. That's why I've decided to go from roughly 4,000 divided by 1.5 million. But give or take, it's not going to be much difference, I wouldn't have thought, to that 0.02% of players that make it, and that's just focusing on the UK alone. There's plenty of players that would like to play, that's focusing on England alone, plenty of players outside England that would like to play in England, and obviously sort of like it might be a little bit different in different countries, and it might be a little bit different, the numbers, if you look at things from a collectively opportunities to be professional all around the world. But I suppose that's another story for another day. So yeah, the point being here, I do think that luck has a role to play, but I said before, in this context, it's not just about sort of good fortune. You sort of wake up one morning, it's like playing a lottery ticket. There's all these sort of variables you have limited control over, and if they sort of align for you and you get the chance, then you're on the way. But it's great to hear what your perspective is. Maybe you've got a different perspective, and I think that I would say that sometimes certain players, who do end up sort of playing professionally might not sort of appreciate sometimes. A lot of them do, but some of them might not appreciate that just because a player might work really hard and dedicate themselves, and you hear this sort of, these people, these sort of, sometimes these motivational gurus and that stuff saying it's all about sort of working hard, whatever type thing, but it's not just about working hard, because some people can work as hard as anybody, but all these variables they don't have any control over, limited control, they don't go their way, and they're not going to make it. So it's not for the lack of effort, really. So I suppose that's what I'm getting at, but it's great to hear what your perspective is. This is my perspective.